Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 234th episode of Real Hawk Talk. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger, and this is kind of a turbulent moment in what has been a bizarre season for the Seahawks, and I am very happy to have OG Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons to talk it over with, as well as Nathan Ernst at Nathan E11. But before we get started talking about the Seahawks, I feel like there's bigger news that needs to be shared with our audience. Jeff, can you tell us if there's anything going on in your life that people should know about?
I got engaged last weekend, and we were out down in your neck of the woods, not in Seattle, but in California, and she kind of knew it was coming, or her parents did, but yeah, it happened late Saturday night, and yeah, she kind of had an idea it was coming. She's pretty excited about it. But
so what'd you do? Walk us through the proposal. How did it go?
So it's funny. The one thing she hates eating fish for whatever reason.
Sure, she's smart. Good. I like her already.
She hates eating fish.
Yeah.
So we're in California, and I take her to this like Italian restaurant, like a pretty nice restaurant in Little Italy down in San Diego. And they bring out her pasta, and it's covered in shrimp.
Sorry, what'd they bring out?
Her pasta, and it was covered in shrimp. So I was planning on doing it at this like nice restaurant right after, and she's just like in a miserable mood. So I have to like audible. I'm trying to like find a bar to go to and trying to find a game plan. And I just ended up doing it back at our hotel room. And she was kind of drunk and she didn't really see it coming. So she couldn't really process what was happening. And we were on a different time zone. And it was pretty late at night. So she couldn't really like call her friends or family or like process what was going on. So she was happy with the audible, but like she was drunk and not realize fully what happened until the next morning. So pretty funny story.
Well, congratulations, dude. This is actually probably the biggest news we're going to cover tonight. And, this is like the most eligible bachelor in Canada is off the market. That's something that everybody needs to know. And does she know about your internet connection? Has she experienced that before she said yes?
Well, she moved in and we changed our whole internet system. So knock on wood, we haven't had as many trouble on the shows this year compared to past years. So we changed our provider and hopefully I didn't just jinx it.
Well, that's awesome news. Congratulations. And I fully expect to see you wearing a Seahawks colored suit for your nuptials, whenever those may be. Nathan, how has your week been? It's been, I don't know, a couple days since we spoke after that game on Sunday. How's life?
Good. I also got engaged 12 years ago.
I was gonna say, does your wife know about this?
Yeah, no, I don't have any. I got snowed in, so that was very exciting. No, I can't one up Jeff here at all, so I don't have much to add.
Well, that's to be expected, and glad that things are at least still working in the Ernst household with all the little ones running around. So
well, it never does.
Jeff, we did not get a chance to talk to you about this game on Sunday, and so I do feel like we should start by giving you a chance to share what your thoughts were.
Well, during the game, I was texting you and Evan, and I was pretty pissed. I don't know if, Brian, you could tell as much. And over the last 3 days, my emotional side has kind of calmed down. And I think just in reality, I think just the Seahawks, the bad defense has come back. So that part was just really hard to accept. And the team we saw in the first 5 weeks, which seems like it really came around, unfortunately, that came back to life, and it's hard to get past that. And the thing that pissed me off the whole game the most was just how bad their pass rush was. I know the run stopping is bad, and that might be a personnel issue, but when you can't get near the quarterback, I found that like just so infuriating to watch. And I was texting Brian and Evan for a while just how bad the pass rush is. And when you play Derek Carr, like that's one thing you have to do. So I found myself just very mad about just that pass rush and the defense basically all game. I'm not as angry as I've been. It's been 3 days. But realistically, like it's hard to feel the same way I was a couple weeks ago. I was a little higher on how Geno played in the second half, although there's some things he did poorly for sure. But yeah, I just found myself very frustrated. I've kind of come back to reality with this team, and it's kind of helped me reset expectations. But yeah, Sunday I was pretty mad. I know some of you were. And just it's hard to that 4-game winning streak was so exciting, and it seemed like they were really going to be contending. And I think we have to reset our expectations for what this team is at this point.
That's I think largely what we talked about, Nathan. But I mean, I'm curious if you guys have had conversations with anybody else, other fans. I've definitely noticed on Twitter, at least, fans kind of grappling with this a little bit this week. Like, do we care that much about what happens with this team the rest of the way? What should we care about? What matters? What doesn't? And, you know, with the Broncos playing as badly as they are and the knowledge that the Seahawks could end up with a pretty exciting draft pick from them, and now the Seahawks around the middle of the first round as things stand right now, there's a little bit more conversation about that as well. And so, you know, as a fan, not as an analyst, but as a fan, what do you care about for the Seahawks the rest of the season, for this season?
I mean, I think I think that should still be the same for everyone, right? Like the playoffs and everything, that was really cool. But if you're getting worked up about that, starting to go away, I mean, you might have lost perspective a little bit. I think, the young players, how they play, this draft class still looks pretty amazing. So that's really still the most important thing. If they make the playoffs this year, that's awesome. That's gravy. If Geno Smith turns into a longish term starter for them, that's awesome, but that's gravy, right? So, yeah, I think the thing that's still really important is that, Charles Cross and Abe Lucas and Tariq Woolen and Jordan Brooks and Darrell Taylor decides to play football again. Like that's all the really critical stuff, right?
Yeah, and for me, I just add to that. I think the thing that keeps me interested is Geno. And I think everything he does now is a data point, and it's such a big evaluation for them. And I know he's kind of looked a little shaky the last couple of weeks, and that changes a little bit of the outlook. But I just find watching him to be so fascinating every week. And we're starting to see him look a little leakier, especially the first halves of the last 3 games. And last week was the first time I really got to see him try to win the game in overtime, win the game in the 2-minute drill. We haven't really seen that all year. So to me, I still really, really enjoy watching Geno play. And I can't stay serious. But yeah, I think Geno for me is by far the number one thing I'm following. Because honestly, I've seen for the rookies, I've mostly seen enough. Like I've come to my evaluation pretty much that they're all the guys we've seen other than Boye Mafe are pretty good. Boye is the one who has a big ceiling, needs to show things. But Geno, these next 6 weeks, I think are really, really important to his evaluation.
What is there, like, tell me, paint the picture of what would need to happen for you to not want to re-sign Geno Smith. Is there a scenario where either of you would be like, nah, it's time to just let him go?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if he has a few pumpkin games, right? I don't know. I would be surprised if that happens, but I could get spooked off of him pretty easily, I think, if he does have some mediocre or bad games, a stretch of that. Especially, if he's bad against the Niners, okay, I guess kind of whatever, right? But if he struggles against some of these easier teams, which he hasn't so far, right? I mean, there's a lot of conversation this week about like, oh, can Geno win the game in the fourth quarter? Like, I think if you go back and look, he probably has several, go ahead fourth quarter drives, right? So I'm not really buying the he can't close a game thing. But yeah, I think if he has a stretch, especially to close out the year where he just doesn't look very good, then I think you have to really start to seriously consider, with the opportunity they have with that Broncos pick, that you go quarterback there.
Yeah, I think that's really the way to look at it. And I think with Geno, like the mistakes I saw last week, especially in the first half, they're different than what I'd seen, say, last year and in the preseason in the past, which is why I thought his ceiling was so low. Like in the past, he was such like a low risk player and such a like kind of how Teddy Bridgewater's been in his career, and he checked down it all the time. He doesn't take any chances down the field. This game, he had like a lot of the turnover worthy throws were like way too confident, like hubris throws, where he's trying to like gun the ball into these tiny windows in the red zone, and he's like playing hero ball, which really he hasn't done. So I thought it was good he was able to respond to that in the second half. He got a 2nd and 17. He got a 2nd and 23, which a lot of those plays were things that he's done on his own. But yeah, if he just turns into like last year Geno again and starts looking like a pumpkin, like how do you not think about audibly? I know Evan was talking about Bryce Young, but I don't think that's a realistic option. I don't think that's going to happen.
So one of the things that I think is a lot of folks are curious about is like, why are we kind of throwing in the towel here? I think is the sentiment I see. Like, I mean, Jeff, you've said this pretty clearly. You still expect this team to make the playoffs, not necessarily because of how good they are, but because of a lot of other factors. Talk a little bit more about what you're expecting there.
So yeah, realistically, there's 3 teams fighting for 2 seeds left in the NFC, other than whatever's going on in the NFC South. But if you look at Washington and the Giants, well, one, the Seahawks beat the Giants, and they play each other twice. So if you look at just pure scheduling, the Seahawks play this Rams team, which we'll talk about later, but they're basically as injured as a team as I've ever seen in my life at this point in the season. All their best players are injured, and they have Carolina and a couple other winnable games. So the Seahawks just based on, and if you look at the Giants still play the Eagles twice, and they play Washington twice, and then the other one plays Dallas, and there's not a lot of winnable games there. So even if the Seahawks go 3-3, and 2 of those wins are against this Rams team, they probably get in with 9 wins. Like, it's hard to see 2 of those teams are probably gonna have to get to 10, which based on them playing twice and based on their schedules, it almost seems impossible. So I think Seattle wins the tiebreaker with the Giants. I think they win the tiebreaker with Washington when I was playing with the playoff machine the other day. So more so than the quality of their team, I think it's more of this watered down conference we've talked about all year. And I think just based on pure situation, I think Seattle will probably make, unless they blow these Rams games or blow the Carolina game, it's hard not to see them make the playoffs. But I don't think it's going to be because of quality. I think it's because of timing.
So I think that they'll probably still make the playoffs too. Like, I agree with everything that Jess said. I think what has probably changed my attitude towards the team is that they lost to a bad Raiders team. Will they make the playoffs? Probably, yes, still. If you're losing to teams like the Raiders, it's no guarantee that you aren't going to lose to Carolina or lose to a Rams team, right? Like, so, and just the chances that a team that loses good teams lose to bad teams, it can happen, right? But I think it's just kind of checked me on like, okay, this is still a team that, like, if they make the playoffs, it's very likely a one and done type deal. There's no real serious chance of a run here or anything.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at as well. I mean, I don't know where the Seahawks will be in terms of wins and losses. I think that I was really enjoying and on cloud 9 that the team was defying logic in almost every way. Geno Smith was like significantly better than we could have expected. The rookies were playing significantly better than could be expected. And then all of a sudden the defense was playing beyond its talent level. And that was really cool. And now I think the reality's kind of set back in. And so for me, even making the playoffs, that would be fine. Like I'm going to root for the Seahawks every single game, like I always do. I'll be disappointed and I'll probably be annoyed when they lose, like I always am. But it's different. The tone of this season is different for me at this point. And if they go and they trounce the Rams twice and they beat Carolina and they lose to the Chiefs and they lose to the 49ers, like, have we really learned much? Like, I mean, have they proven anything different? So I guess these last 2 weeks were an opportunity to make this season more than just mediocre. But it feels like this team, at best is going to be a mediocre entrant in the playoffs. That's something that's way better than any of us expected, which is cool. But for me personally, I predicted an 8-9 season. It's very possible they could be 9-8. Like, that's not exactly like a banner, like massive change. And before we were talking about 2 to 3 games better than what, any of us had predicted. So that's part of what I guess I'm mourning the loss of, to be honest. And also, interesting thing with Geno, I really feel like his level of play has not been as good for a while. And if you look at his numbers, they're still really good. But I thought his first half against Tampa was awful. I thought a lot of his first half against oh my gosh. This past week.
Raiders.
Yes, my God. And this was actually the first week that pass to Tyler Lockett for the touchdown was one of the first deep passes we've seen from him, in a few games in terms of him actually stretching the field. And we've just seen an increase in turnover-worthy plays. We've seen an increase in sacks. We've seen a decrease in audibles at the line of scrimmage that results in very easy completions and quick throws. So I'm really a little concerned about like how much Geno Smith can be the future for this team. Like, and I was to the point where I was convinced there was nobody they were going to get that was going to be better. And so I guess that's another thing I'm kind of adjusting to is, for me, he is the biggest question the rest of the season. Like, can he be much better? Yeah, I don't know what the answer is going to be. I guess we're going to have to see on that one. The other piece of this that we've talked about a fair amount, but I want to bring back up is the Denver stuff. So as of now, I think Denver has a 60% chance of giving the Seahawks a top 5 pick. And there's like a 4% chance of the top overall pick, which would be crazy. We were kind of going through their schedule this week as well. And who do they play this week? You guys remember?
Baltimore.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So they play Baltimore and then they play Kansas City, right?
Yeah.
Those are going to be losses, almost certainly. And then they play, I want to say, the Cardinals at home.
Yeah.
I feel like if the Cardinals win that game, which I think is very realistic. Cardinals played a decent game this last week. They almost beat the Chargers. I'm not sure that the Broncos can really win more than one game the rest of the year, and that would be against the Rams on Christmas. Like, the rest of their games are against Kansas City and the Chargers. So I think the ceiling for this Broncos team is to get 2 more wins. And that would get them to what, like 5 and what was it, 5 and 13?
5 and too many.
5 and 12. 5 and 12. So yeah, like it feels like 4 wins is a pretty realistic outcome, and not totally out of the realm that they could lose the rest of their games. Like, what's your current prediction on that, Jeff?
I have them right now with 1 win, and I thought they would definitely beat Carolina.
Yeah.
And there's a point in the schedule where it's like, okay, they have Raiders, Carolina, and I'm like, oh, we're getting excited. We're gonna end up with 12th pick. And I don't know I know, Brian, you were listening on the radio. I watched that entire game, and as bad as Russ has looked, this was by far the worst he's looked all season. And I don't know if you've seen any those weird stories coming out of Denver today where the media is trying to defend who came to his birthday party last night. And it's like that movie Draft Day, and it's just unraveling at levels. And I heard Daniel Jeremiah was on a podcast, and they're talking about how to fix Denver next year, and he basically threw his hands up and said they are completely screwed. And it's just Russell. I keep expecting Russell to snap out of this, and I just can't believe how bad he was last game. And if this is what he's going to play like the rest of the year, and the defense, it seems like there was that scene on the sideline where the defensive lineman, I remember I texted you guys, where the defensive lineman screaming at his face, and Russell just hanging his head down. And if the defense starts to quit with this Russell play, I think Arizona can win that game. It's hard to pick Arizona in any game right now, but with Kyler and Hopkins, there's a lot more going on there. So I think unless this Rams team just throws in the towel, and they have 2 games against the Chiefs who need to win right now, and the Chargers were going to need a win to be in the playoffs, I don't see many wins there.
Well, that's gonna be the sprinkles on top as we go through the rest of the year. But let's turn our attention back to the Seahawks. There are a couple bits of news before we get into Patreon questions and talking about this game in more detail. One was interesting was the Seahawks made a waiver claim today. Jeff, you want to tell people what they did there?
Yeah. So the Seahawks picked up John Abram, who's a safety. He was a first-round pick of the Raiders, the John Gruden, Mike Mayock year, where all their first-round picks failed. He was recently on waive, and Green Bay claimed him, and Green Bay had to waive him already because of some roster concerns. But I saw Nathan actually a couple of days ago was saying he's a guy Seattle should be looking at based on Ryan Neal being injured, based on if anyone's seen Josh Jones play this year, it doesn't look like an NFL contributor. So he looks like a guy who just doesn't have the athletic skill set right now. And Abram is a really good run stuffer. He's really bad in coverage, but the Seahawks' biggest weakness the last couple of weeks has been stopping the run. So if Ryan Neal is potentially banged up and they need someone who can fill in, I think I'd rather have someone like him who can stop the run. And we've seen what happens when Josh Jones tries to tackle people. It's been pathetic. And there was another one on that big Jacobs run this week. So if they can upgrade that spot and they can get someone who had a first-round pedigree, why not?
Yeah, I mean, Abram has not done much of anything, Nathan, as far as I've seen in the NFL. He's been a pretty big bust, and I don't know that we should expect him to be much different. Then again, the things that he seems to be talented at are things that, Jamal Adams is talented at as well. Not necessarily he's the same player, but maybe a little bit more around the line of scrimmage, maybe a little bit more of a physical safety. Maybe he's got some special skills that if, they build around him, maybe he can actually be a positive here and have a little bit more impact than he did other places where he's been asked to play a more classic safety position.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. He's one of those interesting guys who has a reputation as a hitter, and for good reason on that, but isn't actually very good at tackling. So yeah, I mean, you're right. He's a bust. I've seen people saying, "Oh, it's going to get Josh Jones off the field," or "Oh, he's better than Quandre Dick." No, this is a guy that's been cut twice in a month, and they are only bringing him in because they need the depth with the Neal injury. So don't get your expectations up, but yeah, I mean, he was a fairly regarded draft prospect. I think people were still surprised when he went as high as he did. So overdrafted a little bit. The first round stuff is maybe a little bit of it's like talking about James Carpenter as a former first round pick or something like that. So, but who knows? Maybe Pete can work some magic on him and get him to be functional, and he can, make a play, right? He can hit somebody for his fumble, and who knows?
The other piece of news was the injury report. So I don't know if you guys saw this today, but there were 6 players that did not practice today. Bruce Irvin did not practice with a knee injury. Ryan Neal, we just talked about, elbow and shoulder. But the other piece was there were 4 players who did not practice today due to illness. There was Damian Lewis, Travis Homer, Phil Haynes, and Al Woods. So those are all relatively prominent players for the team. Don't know if this means that there's been a COVID outbreak or a flu outbreak or whatever, but is that enough for you guys to feel concerned about if all of those guys don't suit up? Does that change your perspective at all about this matchup this week?
Probably not. One, it's still only Wednesday, and a lot of people can get it. Might be just a flu or a fever or whatever. And this time of year, basically everyone I know is sick right now. So I don't think it changes much. And if you consider who the Rams are missing this week, I don't think like taking Al Woods or out of the game is that much of a disadvantage compared to them who have Donald, Kupp, Stafford, basically their entire Allen Robinson is out for the season. So I don't know. The Seahawks defense is so bad, like it's hard to imagine them getting worse, but I don't know. It's Wednesday, it's an illness. I think that happens pretty standard December.
Nathan, can you take a look for patron questions? I think it's time for us to take some patron questions, see what we've got from the crew. And while Nathan's pulling those up, if you haven't already given the show a like, please do. Go ahead and click subscribe, click the bell to get notified for when we go live, and then go over to patreon.com/hawkblogger and sign up. Get access to the Slack channel right away. As we've talked about, Twitter has who knows what future is going to look like. And the Real Hawk Talk Slack channel is an awesome place to talk with hundreds of friendly, fun, smart Seahawks fans. And they talk during the game, they talk between the shows, and they get to ask us questions every week as we are about to answer right now. So what do we got this week, Nathan?
We have we split the question thread. Okay, I got it. Brian, Jen Mazzarolo wants to know, how do we fix the defense this season? Is there anything that you want to see Seattle do that will make like maybe not fix, but a meaningful improvement?
I feel like the path to improvement, like the realistic path, like
more Cody Barton.
You know, I was going to go there, but I honestly I don't believe there's an option for Cody Barton here. I told you I'm a John Radigan fan, but realistically, off of ACL, I don't think he's going to come back and be.
The Seahawks do have a negative EPA per play average when Cody Barton is on the field, and a positive one when he is off the field. So
yeah, that is called correlation, not causation. So I'm not going to attribute that to Cody Barton, but in any event, you know, like pass rush is a place where the Seahawks, you know, if you talk about how they became the number one defense for 4 weeks, and part of it, everyone I think focused on the run defense was one of the biggest turnarounds. They went from being one of the worst to being one of the best run defenses, but it was actually, they were number 1 in the NFL in sacks for 4 weeks, number 1, and in sack rate. And I do feel like they've got some parts there. And I guess I always go back to, I'd love to see them get a little bit more aggressive, because I just don't think if they line up man on man, I don't think that they're going to be able to hold up. And so they're already talking about committing more defensive backs to the line of scrimmage to help stop the run game. And that's going to come at the expense of coverage. I would say do the same in the pass game, potentially send more guys, get some more pressure, take some more risks. But then again, that's a total fan thing to say. If I could pick my perfect defensive coordinator, my favorite defensive influence the Seahawks have ever had was Jim Johnson when he was a linebackers coach here in the late 90s. And the Seahawks had Sean Springs and Chad Brown and Daryl Smith, and they just created a shit ton of turnovers because they were super aggressive and they blitzed from all over the place. That was fun. I miss those days.
Jeff Braxton says that Clint Hurt is usually one of the focal points of criticism for this defense of the defensive coordinator. Does Sean Desai deserve a larger share of the blame as he's more responsible for the weekly preparation of the defensive game plan? And more generally, do you think that either of those coaches could be in jeopardy if this defense doesn't significantly improve by the end of the year?
Well, for second question, I think that's definitely an interesting topic, and I heard you guys talk about it the other day. And I saw some comments from Pete where this week, or it was after the game, where there seemed to be some shots at some of the schemes they were running and some of the calls they were making. And that's a little new for him because he's been just praising how much he's liked working with Desai and the defense had been good up until the Tampa game. So if they can't get this figured around and this run defense remains this bad, I would not be surprised if Pete wants to go back to what he knows, which is 4-3 fronts, and because it's been so easy to run them, it makes it so hard to run the defense. So if they remain this bad the last 6 games, I would not be surprised if Pete just goes back to what he knows. But the Desai thing, I don't know, especially when he's more of a defensive back guy, and I think largely their defensive backs have played really well this year, and I think they've really developed that spot compared to where it was in the last couple of years. So I see more of the issues as personnel, but again, the scheme itself is not working. It's so easy to run against them, and there's 3-man fronts, and they're just running outside, and it's working, and they don't have the safeties to tackle right now. Diggs coming off his ACL is not the same player in this first year backs, which happens a lot. So I don't know if I see it, but if the defense remains that bad, I don't think it's unquestioned that it could happen.
Before you go on a different, this is Evan, Jeff, and I were talking about this a little bit, and Evan's take is essentially like, this is coaching, another year, the team's bad on defense, and are these coaches, the defensive coaches, going to last? I see this so clearly as a talent thing in the front seven. Do you guys feel like if they had some other coach that this front seven would be somehow better? Like top half of the league potential if they had better coaching?
Top half of the league?
No, I agree. I think the defensive linemen, the talent there is just not enough.
Well, and we talk about this all the time, and you saw it last game. Like, the Raiders were getting killed defensively, and they won the game. We can talk about Josh Jacobs. They won the game because Max Crosby blew up 2 plays. If Max Crosby doesn't miss that chip block, but if Max Crosby doesn't blow up that last play, Travis Homer is running wide open, and the Seahawks win the game. And we talk about all these blue chip players and game records and all this stuff. The Seahawks' best 2 players on their front seven are Al Woods and probably Nuosu. And if you're looking at good defenses around the league, like if your top 2 front seven players are Al Woods and no disrespect to those guys are having good years. Those are not close to.
Those are rotational guys.
That's what I mean. And you see the teams that have good defense, typically they have those superstar players or the good player. 49ers have Nick Bosa and Fred Warner.
You guys remember Tony McDaniels, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where would he rank on this Seahawks defensive line?
Like, he'd be right at the top.
Like, that's my feeling too. And he was like a complete rotational, 3-tech for the Seahawks. That was a transformative defense. But anyway, I just had to bring it up because it's wild to me. I definitely think the coaching hasn't been great. I think there's issues there. But the idea that they're on a short leash and that this needs to be blown up after one season, I would need them to be able to actually have some talent in the front seven to feel like they've blown it.
Now, the flip side of that is they are not give up 230 yards rushing, give up a 80-yard rushing touchdown at the end of the game to lose it bad either. Like, they should be able to play sound defense, right? Maybe it's only 20th ranked defense, but it shouldn't be whatever we saw last week.
And yeah, the run defense has been last year was Brian, what was it, top 5 last year with a lot of the same defensive linemen. It's Al Woods and Puna and
Monet.
I know Shelby Harris is new and he's more of an interior guy, but they shouldn't be this bad.
Yeah.
All right. Lucas of the German Seahawks wants to know, Jordan Brooks extension talks may start as early as March of next year, depending on whether they pick up the 5th year option. Based on his current play and the fact that he's the leading NFC linebacker in Pro Bowl voting, what kind of deal, Brian, would you be comfortable giving him? And I'll give you a few comparisons here. So Fred Warner signed just a year or two ago, $19 million a year APY. CJ Mosley signed a few years ago at $17 million. Shaq Thompson signed a few years ago at 13.5. And the Jaguars linebacker, whose name I won't butcher, signed, I believe, this year for $15 million. So are you comfortable giving Jordan Brooks something around $15 million a year?
Before I answer that, just want to confirm. So I just double checked. Yeah, the Seahawks were second and actually tied for first in the NFL in rushing yards per attempt allowed last year.
Bring back Ken Norton.
Yeah.
Lucas also
and Bobby Wagner,
maybe, yeah.
among other things. Would I be willing to give him 16 million? Was that the number you said?
15, I think. So Foyesade Oluyokun, I'm probably butchering that. The Jaguars linebacker, they signed him, I believe, this year for $15 million APY for 4 years. Or sorry, 3 years.
Let me acknowledge this because most people on these shows never do. I don't feel like I am well versed enough in this scheme and in the film to be able to say exactly how well Jordan Brooks has played relative to what he's expected to do. So I think he has one of the harder positions to evaluate because so much of a linebacker's ability to play well has to do with how well the defensive line in front of them is doing. And there's been a ton of times that we're seeing blockers get to the second and third level without any resistance. And so I do think he's had to deal with more than you'd hope. Having said that, there are plays I feel like I can evaluate a linebacker on. And there's been plays where he's getting beat to the edge. There's been very few plays where I've seen him actually attack a gap and make a educated guess about where things are going and make a play at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. Like if you looked at his percentage of tackles that were tackles for loss, I would bet it's one of the lowest percentages in the league. Like he has so many tackles and I would bet almost none of them are behind the line of scrimmage. And so what I pay for in a premier linebacker is impact plays, interceptions, forced fumbles, tackles behind the line, like that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's hard for me to justify. So like right now, no, I think I would play out Jordan Brooks' contract until the very last minute and hope I had more information that told me that, okay, yes, he is an elite player and he's going to elevate us. Right now, I think he's closer to Leroy Hill than he is to Bobby Wagner.
All right. Let's play a game. Let's guess the number of tackles for loss that Jordan Brooks has this year. Jeff, what do you think? He has, for context, he has 122 total tackles, 82 solo tackles.
I feel like it's been low. I'm going to go with 6.
Brian?
I'm going to go with 4.
You quadrupled his actual number of tackles for loss. He has had 1 tackle for loss all year long. 1 and 2 quarterback hits, which isn't really his job, but still. That's rough. Okay. Let me see here. All right. We argued about this one for a little while. Gargom wants to know, Jeff. All right. Picture yourself. It's draft night. You are John Schneider. And with Seattle's first pick, both Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are available, and he wants you to tell him why you are not picking Jalen Carter.
Like you're just not picking him because of Will Anderson, or you just don't want to draft Jalen Carter?
Well, I guess who would you pick, and if it's not Jalen Carter, why?
I would take Will Anderson. I just think, and no knock on Jalen Carter. Like if they took Jalen Carter, I would be thrilled, and it's probably a more likely scenario given how the top 5 is looking. But I just think those like top of the line pass rush kind of prospects, they're so hard to find. And I know you can find like a Crosby in the 4th round or something like that, but like I'm talking this like Von Miller. The guy he gets compared to is Von Miller, and you saw Myles Garrett went number 1. Von Miller went number 2. Bosa went number 2. The other Bosa went number 3. Like finding a guy like that who's just like a top of the line edge rusher are as rare as a franchise quarterback to find in the draft. They go in the top 5, and based on how Seattle's talent level is looking, there's not going to be a lot of scenarios where they're in the top 5 and get an edge rush talent like this. So I just think the way, and especially in the Fangio scheme, which has more 3 down fronts, 3 down linemen, and they don't really have that like penetrating defensive tackle, like a guy on the edge that can win. And like if you watch the last game and Carr on 3rd down, like they didn't have an edge guy get near him. And it's just, I think that's such an organizational need right now. Again, I Jalen Carter, I think, is the more likely pick, and I would be absolutely thrilled with him. I think he's a perfect fit for what they do. I heard Matt Miller on 710 today compare him to Fletcher Cox, which is a player that's been so good for so long. But I think like that Von Miller kind of player is just so rare. And really throughout this whole Carroll era, they haven't had a pass rusher with that kind of pedigree. And they really haven't had one in Seattle in a long time. So to me, that's like the number 1 organizational need right now.
See, I think it's interesting because I've seen the Von Miller comps and some of that, and I've admittedly watched only a couple games of Anderson really closely, but I don't see that type of an edge rusher. Like, I think he might be very, very good, but I don't quite see the just whip your ass around the edge type of a rusher like Von Miller is. They actually play him as one of the down linemen in a three-man front a lot. Which is interesting. And for a guy his size, like he can bully, he can pressure, he can bull rush. Like it's not that he's not a good pass rusher, but the Von Miller stuff is pretty interesting to me. So I don't really know which one I like more right now. I'll probably get an opinion as I watch more of both of these guys, but I think that it's being a little exaggerated just from what I've seen, how much better Anderson is than Carter. I still think he's probably the better prospect, but I don't know that the way it's being talked about is really accurate.
I think you're right, Nathan. I think I've been reading more and more. There's a lot of people in the league that have Carter as the number 1 player on their board. And I know Nathan talked about this. That Georgia team that had, I think, like a ton of guys drafted last year. A lot of people were saying in the league that Carter was the most talented player on that team. And when he's come back healthy, the ability for him to just blow up plays is very unique. And he's an athlete. And the best part about a guy like Carter over Anderson is he helps solve Seattle's 2 biggest needs right now, which is both the run and the pass game. And someone who can blow up plays like that, to me, is super valuable and almost as rare as the edge rush. So I think any of those guys, I'd be so happy to get blue chip defensive linemen in this building.
You mentioned the almost as rare. I was going to bring this up. I'm going to bring it back to one of Nathan's favorite topics, running backs. Like, part of the reason, we've talked about, Nathan and I are actually pretty aligned on this one about not valuing running backs is because you can get value later. Like you can plug in a lot of players to do that. If you add up all the dominant edge rushers or even all the very good edge rushers in the league, and you add up all the very good interior defensive linemen that can rush the passer as well, I think the list of edge rushers is like at least twice as long, and it might be like 4 times as long. 1, do you guys agree with that? And 2, if yes, then for me, if it's close, unless you've got a really clear indication that the edge player is like just a sure bet, like this guy is going to be transformative, I think you always have to prioritize interior guys.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I haven't thought about it enough to really say strongly one way or the other, like which one is there more of. But one of the interesting things I think to think about is like, where would you rank Max Crosby among edge rushers? Would he be top 5 for you?
I think he's got to be in
I
that range.
TJ Watt, the Bosa's, Khalil Mack. I mean, Mack's not probably what he was. So, like, I think you can make an argument that Max Crosby isn't even a top 5 defensive end. He's amazing, right? I mean, he's really good. I'd kill for Seattle to have him on our team. So, I think that there's probably something this. And then if you flip it around, right? Like, all right, like you said, who are the really elite interior rushers? We have Aaron Donald and Chris Jones, and maybe Fletcher Cox is still in that argument, and guys like Geno Atkins are past their prime. So, like, who are? There's probably other ones that I'm forgetting.
Grady
Now,
Jarrett and
Jeff
like Simmons, like
Simmons for sure. Jarrett's a little long in the tooth. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. You could probably make an argument either way.
I think that's a really compelling case because there's not as the numbers are clearly there, and like really we saw the kind of impact that Aaron Donald's done for these guys for years, and these guys aren't going to be Aaron Donald, but Cortez Kennedy, and we've seen they haven't really had a player like that since, even like the way Michael Bennett used to impact games. Like he gave more trouble to a lot of than say what Cliff Averill did. So I think the fact that we're even having this conversation is incredible because these are guys that the Seahawks have built up such a good core of young players. And if you can add one of these guys in the building, it just changes their ceiling to me so much.
All right. We got 2 more here. Jason A says, for the sake of argument, if Seattle wanted to unload Jamal Adams and his contract this offseason, which he says, Pete and John probably don't have any intent to do. One, do you think anyone would trade for him? And kind of what would they trade for him? And then how high would Seattle take a safety if they did trade him? Jeff, what do you think? Is anyone interested in Jamal Adams? And I guess, do you think that Seattle would be looking to trade him?
I think at his number, coming off 3 straight injuries-ridden seasons and not even playing a full half of the game this year, have someone take on him at $18 million or $20 million a year, whatever he is next year. I don't see a market at all, and I don't think you'd get him anything more than like a 5th or 6th round pick. It's mostly just taking that contract off. Seattle's going to have an interesting decision because you watch them play and they really miss like an impact players in general. And he's one of the few guys on their roster that is an impact defensive player. But Seattle's got, I think, $18 million on Diggs next year and $18 million cap number on Adams. And I think they're going to have to make a decision on one of them. And they're either going to have to redo that Adams contract, or I think they might have to move on one of them and draft a safety because the way they play with the 2 high safeties, $36 million to probably one of the easiest positions to replace in the league. And we've seen what Ryan Neal's done this year. I don't think there's a chance they could trade him. I think if anything, they either cut him and there's a dead cap. I think after he's a July 1st, or they have to redo his deal entirely.
How high of a pick would a team have to offer to get Seattle to trade Jamal Adams? If somebody came to Seattle and offered them a 3rd round pick for Jamal Adams, Brian, do you think that Seattle would take it?
It's a weird question because the cap implications are so problematic that I don't know if they could. Like, you're talking about accelerating the rest of his contract into next year, essentially, his bonus, and it's a big enough number. I don't know if if they offered a 1st round pick, they may have to like restructure a bunch of deals. They might have to cut somebody, or I don't know. So I'd have to look more at the cap situation. As far as player value, yeah, 3rd round pick, you'd absolutely take that right now because Jamal Adams hasn't been able to stay healthy more than anything else. I think you've got to realize that they need to, if they could do it over again, not over again the whole thing, but if they could make a choice right now, they would go with 2 young safeties, I think, instead of the 2 older injured guys that they've got.
Seattle trades Jamal Adams before June 1st, according to Over the Cap. If I'm reading this right, it's $19 million in dead money.
Right.
Or sorry, $28 million in dead money.
Yeah, it's a big number.
but they could afford that. Like if somebody came with a first round pick, hard to think they wouldn't do that, even with the hit to the cap this year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
not going to happen though.
Yeah,
no one's offering anything for Jamal Adams. So
I think that's a really good point. I think somebody would have to really blow Seattle away to justify the cap hit, and not just writing out to see if Jamal can recover. Okay, last one here. KDB says in his post-game remarks, Pete basically said they prepared for Devontae Adams at the expense of preparing to defend the run. Isn't that a pretty egregious miss? Isn't it the coach's job to prepare for all potential scenarios so as to give the team the best possible chance for success? To me, this is like a cook at a restaurant saying he burned your burger because he was trying to get your salad right. Brian, how frustrating, I guess, was that comment to you? Especially, I mean, on the one hand, I think there's probably no shame in trying to make sure you keep Devontae Adams under wraps, but that was a pretty good Raiders rushing team going into that game. That wasn't like going against Tampa.
That's what I was thinking about is, I mean, that's back-to-back weeks or back-to-back games, at least, that coaches have not just made an error in judgment schematically and in preparation and game plan, but they gave themselves, like, they didn't then adjust or have a way to adjust. And so I've got no problems saying we're going to take away one player and we're going to make them rely on the other and we're going to focus on that. That's fine. But then, when the guy is having the success that Jacobs was, and it wasn't just in the run game, it was also in the pass game, then adjust, like make a change. And I think that's 2 games in a row that the coaches have certainly not set the defense up for success. I guess I respect Pete for acknowledging that. A lot of coaches just end up pointing it back at the players. But man, I think it's pretty damning. I think it's an issue. And that's what gives people the fuel to say, hey, it's not just the talent. So yeah, I think it's pretty frustrating.
KDB also says, P.S. Thanks to all of you for always being here to talk us through this stuff. I would like to say thanks to all our Patreon members because y'all always bring pretty great questions. We get a lot of conversation out of it. So I think that's it for the Slack stuff.
Awesome. If you haven't already, go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up, get access now. Hey, it's even a good present. Holidays are coming around. You get over to hawkblogger.com, go to the store link, buy a sweatshirt. My favorite sweatshirt came from that store. So got a good sale going on now. Go there, grab your favorite merch, and surprise someone with something a little bit off the beaten trail, not your typical Seahawks gear. So let's talk about this Rams game and this Rams team. We've like reveled in how bad the Broncos have played this year. We have not reveled almost at all about how bad the Rams are playing this year. Both of them have a former Seahawk on them. Russ was traded. Russ kind of pushed his way out a little bit. Bobby was cut and clearly wanted to stay. Their feelings about those 2 different players seems about as far apart as you could be. Both of them are experiencing just horrible seasons in their new location. Jeff, I know you spent some time looking at the Rams. I don't know how you've done that, but like catch people up that don't know on how many guys are out for the Rams.
Yeah, so I have been spending the season enjoying the Rams suffering because I thought last year just like the coverage of that Super Bowl and how Sean McVay was like a genius for like predicting Aaron Donald would make a play, all this stuff. I found that so insufferable. And Matt Stafford being a Hall of Famer, that was the talk after the Super Bowl last year, and they were debating it. And a year later, how stupid that looks. So they've had the season from hell. Brian mentioned this today, and we've talked about it for years. They've been one of the best teams in terms of injury luck, basically throughout the whole Sean McVay era. Since he's got there, they've barely suffered injuries, and when they have, it hasn't been like last year, like Robert Woods got hurt, but they got Beckham the week before, and they've been one of like the most fortunate team. This year, that has completely fallen off a cliff. I don't know if they used up or they made a deal with the devil or something to win that Super Bowl, but I've never seen a team go through what they've gone through injury-wise, where basically like they're at like their third string player at basically every offensive line position. And then since then, Cooper Kupp is basically might not play again this season. He hasn't played the last couple of weeks. Matt Stafford's had multiple concussions or neck issues, whatever they're pretending it is. And so that's their two best offensive players. And now that just keeps continuing. Aaron Donald, who hasn't missed a game for injury in his career, I learned last week, has a high ankle sprain, and he's already been ruled out for the game. And there's other guys. Ashawn Robinson's one of their best run stuffers. He's out for the game, and I think he's out for the season. And there's talk. I know their number one beat writer is saying they're talking about just shutting a lot of players down and just evaluating young players. And so you consider Allen Robinson also, who was their big free agent signing on offense, he's out for the season. So they're down to like fourth string offensive linemen. They're missing their top two receivers, their best two defensive linemen. Like they're trotting out basically a preseason roster. I don't think I've seen a roster like this early in the year. And they're not tanking. They don't have a pick. So if you watch their guys play offense the last couple of weeks, it is one of the most atrocious looking teams you've ever seen.
You skipped over that pretty quickly, but I think it's worth saying again, which is they don't own their first round pick because they traded it. They traded it for Matt Stafford. So Detroit is going to get the Rams first round pick. And I mean, Nathan, if you were a Rams fan and you had the choice back then to go through exactly what they've gone through, which is they won a Super Bowl, even though I think it was a fraudulent Super Bowl, but they won it. They won it against a mediocre team. They're incredibly fortunate that the Chiefs or the Bills didn't make it. Either of those teams would have trounced the Rams. But in any event, they won it. And now they've fallen off a cliff. They're the worst team following a Super Bowl victory in history. And there's every reason to believe that they are going to continue to get worse. Would you do it? Would you take the one ring knowing that you're going to then suffer, for a while afterwards?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, I think. And I think that's a lot more information than they obviously had at the time, right? Like there wasn't necessarily a reason to think that they were going to be this bad after winning it. So yeah, I mean, I'll take a Super Bowl win and then a couple crappy years, and then you get back at it.
I've got a harder question for you. Can you name two Rams receivers that will play in this game?
Ben Skoranek. And
That was pretty good.
Tyler Higbee.
I don't know if Higbee's available.
Yeah. You said Tutu Atwell's hurt?
He hurt himself last week. He went on IR, I think. I might have misread something, but let me double check. Yeah, I don't know. I think Atwell maybe I was thinking last year. Maybe I got the wrong news. So maybe Tutu Atwell. Yeah, it's like Van Jefferson.
Oh yeah, Van Jefferson.
Yeah.
But like guys named like Kyron Williams, Bryson Hopkins.
That's a Madden creative player name.
Lance McCutcheon, Brandon Powell.
Lance McCutcheon.
Kyron Williams apparently is actually a running back.
Jesus.
Their starting quarterback. Do you know the name of their starting quarterback?
It's
I think you just named them. Perkins.
It's Bryce Perkins, not Wolford. You're looking for Wolford. He is all out. So, I mean, Jeff's not kidding. I mean, this is.
What's the dude's name? Who's the quarterback?
Bryce Perkins.
Was that like a? All right.
Yeah. Go to Google.
Like, when you're watching the preseason and it's the fourth quarter and like you're like you've never heard of any of these players and you don't know how you're watching. Like that's what they're trotting out in December 1st. I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Bryce Perkins played. Does anyone know where Bryce Perkins played college football?
I do, but I'll leave myself out of this.
I was gonna say, you have a pretty good shot because it's 3 different schools. He played at Arizona State, Arizona Western, which I did not know existed, and Virginia, which is quite the juggernaut of college football programs.
He was their leading rusher against Kansas City. So he is a bit of a running quarterback, if you want to give him that. And if you want to give hope for Rams fans, the Seahawks have given up rushing yards to everybody.
Oh no, he's going to taste some
opportunity.
Oh no.
They give them up to quarterbacks. They give them up to running backs. I think if the receivers decided, they give them up to backup quarterbacks, even like Taysom Hill. So maybe that'll be problematic. But the Broncos the Rams had 82 yards of passing offense against the Chiefs. 82. It's hard to have under 100 yards passing in the NFL, even with a bad quarterback. So this is an awful offense. They now don't have Aaron Donald, which is a huge deal. They still have Jalen Ramsey. They still have, Bobby Wagner. They still have Troy Hill and Taylor Rapp and Ernest Jones and some of those guys. They still have Leonard Floyd, who has killed us over the years. I guess one of the other things I found fascinating when I researched this team, they are number one. This defense for the Rams is number one in the NFL against and limiting explosive passes and explosive rushes. Number one in both. But yet they've given up a bunch of points. They've given up a fair amount of yards. So they are like one of the worst defenses in completion percentage against. So apparently they're giving up a lot of like underneath passes, I would guess. But now without Aaron Donald, that's a pretty massive change. So if you're the Seahawks guys, are you looking for them to go at the pass defense? Are you looking for them to try to get the run game going, which is, we talk about the run defense for the Seahawks, but the run offense has been as bad. Like, it's hard to be as bad when you're just not gaining yards instead of just giving up hundreds and hundreds, but they haven't done shit on the ground. So how do you attack this Rams team? What's your approach? Start with you, Jeff.
I don't feel comfortable in us running the ball against anyone right now, even if you take Donald out. I think it's a combination of things where our offensive line, especially the interior, has not been great in the run game. And I think Kenneth Walker has missed a lot of reads and made a lot of rookie mistakes. And I don't know if it's being talked about, but I think Kenneth Walker has contributed a lot to a lot of their run issues. And he was dead on arrival a bunch last week as well. But like you talked about, bad Austin Blythe was. The guards didn't grade very well. And this is so for me, like I don't know if I'm trying to attack Jalen Ramsey and have him on Metcalf or something, but I think kind of the play action linebackers get those tight ends in space and move the chains like that. I think I'm throwing the tight ends, trying to operate the middle of the field and get Kenneth Walker maybe in space on kind of passes. But I don't think I trust our run game. And if they're not giving up explosive plays to DK and Lockett, I think that tight end matchup, I think that's the best way to attack these guys.
I mean, as a fan, Nathan, I think the thing that would be the most entertaining would have to be DK Metcalf burning Jalen Ramsey, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, easily. And I think Seattle should come out and they should plan to lean on the pass. I don't think they need to do anything too crazy. I mean, they've been a successful running team at times, so they don't need to just like completely abandon it, but they should come out prepared to pass quite a bit and prepared to pass even more if the running game can't get going. So
it feels like a game where the tight ends could play a pretty reasonable role. And I mean, Aaron Donald being out, this is a team that already was struggling. Aaron Donald wasn't even getting that much pass pressure with this team because I think people were like triple teaming him. Yeah, I don't know. I want to see them test the run game and see if they can get that going, because I feel like if the Seahawks can run the ball with any success, then they can put up 40 points in this game. Like, I think it could really unravel for the Rams. But I'm with you. If there's any resistance, if they're struggling there, then just cut it and go to the pass game and go to the quick game if you need to, and just keep moving the chains, get enough points. How many points would the Rams need to score for it to be a disaster against the Seahawks? Like, what is your limit, Nathan, on what is an acceptable amount of points to allow to a team like this? This is a team that scored 10 points last week in Kansas City. They're going to be home against the Seahawks. What's acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hoping to keep them under 20 points, right? I think anything over 25 is when you start to talk about, disaster. If they're giving up 30 points to this team, like, I don't know, man. Just at that point, I'm going to be calling for every head on that defensive coaching staff. I don't care who the players are.
I just got mad with you bringing it up as a possibility. Oh my God. Like, the Rams, Jeff, have scored over 20 points twice the entire year. And that's with all the other guys that they've had available at different times. That's back when Cooper Kupp was there and Matt Stafford was playing and Allen Robinson was there and so forth. What's your number? Like,
to me, over 20, I'd be real, unless it's like a garbage time. This offense is so bad from just like a personnel standpoint. And like, it's one thing to not stop the Raiders or Tampa, who have pretty good skill players and pretty good offensive line talent. These guys are like, they're the worst offensive line talent in the league, and they have the worst running back group in the league with a third string quarterback and no receivers. Like, to allow more than 20 points to that team, or if they're running the ball on you successfully, it'll just suck the life out of any, like, even if they win a game like that and that happens, they'll just suck the life out of any, like, how much you can even watch these guys, even if you want them to make the playoffs at all. So I think anything over 20 points would be super discouraging.
Honestly, my number's 10. Like, if you allow more than 10 points to this offense, you are an embarrassment. Like, this is not an NFL offense. It's just not. And the Seahawks defense has been really bad. But I mean, if they allow 13, I won't be like furious or anything like that. But if they're getting up to 20, come on. I mean, that is atrocious. So yeah, I think the bar for this team is a lot lower for me than it is for you guys, or higher, depending on how you want to look at it. I just, man. There's a lot of potential for me to be furious at this game, even though there's very little at stake from an overall perspective, and what I've talked about, like my perspective on the playoffs. I will not be able to handle watching the Rams offense do anything against our defense. It'll drive me crazy. So with that in mind, let's talk about predictions. Nathan, I'll start with you. What is the score of this game going to be? Who's going to win?
I think this is the same score that I predicted last week, but I'm going to roll it back. 27-19 Seahawks.
All right, Jeff.
I'm going to go 30-13 for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I'm going to go 37-10 Seahawks. I'm going to go 37-17. I'm gonna go 37-17. I feel like I feel like I will get annoyed enough. Like, they'll do something annoying. So that's where I'm gonna go on this.
Well, you have that dilemma again, Brian, this week.
What's that?
Well, if the Rams win, the draft situation looks a lot better.
It's true. It's true, because
Detroit. People didn't like that conversation last week, but
I know we talked about it a little bit on the post game too. Yeah.
Did you run the poll again?
I did not. I chose not to aggravate people. Apparently, you can ask an innocent question and people judge it whether it's a good enough question to even ask, which I don't believe those things exist. But no, I mean, whatever. People freaked out about it, so I got better things to do with my time than deal with that shit.
Not a poster. You're not cut out for Twitter.
Yeah, you can't ship.
That's true. I mean, I don't know how I've lasted this long, but yeah. Anyway, I guess, Jeff, my real answer there is I've looked at the Broncos schedule and I'm pretty confident, knock on every piece of wood, their ceiling for wins is lower than I thought. And so I'm not as worried about some of these other situations, but we'll see. We will see. All right. With all that in mind, thank you to Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons, the engaged Jeff Simmons. Congrats on the engagement. Well done. We will be looking forward to hearing all about the wedding plans and pictures and all that good stuff. We will shove some sort of cake in your face at some point ourselves, just because we want to. And thank you to Nathan Ernst at Nathan E11, who almost wore a shirt for this show.
You would be able to tell. Oh no, you can't see chest hair.
No, it just looks like you're stretching your own skin, is what it looks like. But we appreciate you showing for the show and having the conversations with us. And thank you, everybody tuned in. Go over to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up, get access to the Slack channel, talk Seahawks with other folks, commiserate, celebrate, all the good stuff. And then we will be here for the postgame show after whatever happens against the Rams on Sunday. So looking forward to talking more with you then. Let's hope the Seahawks win. We could all use one of those. Until that point, go Hawks. Have a great rest of your evening.